This is the Capitol Rundown.
No chaos, no spectacle, no shutdown.
Today we are gathered once again to kick the can down the road.
In order to vote on a tax increase or a tax cut in an election year, you have to do the math. Does this help me get reelected or not? And if the answer is not, it won't get done.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Klepfer. We begin today with an update to the ongoing battle for the leadership of the Michigan Republican Party. Party chairperson Kristina Karamo was voted out of that job at a meeting earlier this month, but a week later, another group of state Republicans voted to reaffirm that she is the chairperson. Right now, depending on who you ask, Melinda Pago is the acting chairperson. During Karamo's time as leader, court filings show the party defaulted on bank loans and faced other financial problems. Karamo herself is a controversial figure, repeatedly voicing support for disproven conspiracy theories, such as claiming that massive election fraud was used to steal the 2020 presidential election for Joe Biden. And now Karamo is threatening to take legal action against party members who say she is not the leader. In letters sent to state Republican officials and posted online by Bridge, Michigan, Karamo and her allies say those Republicans are using trademarks for MyGOP and the Michigan Republican Party. They also say the others have been spreading inaccurate information. One of the letters says the defamatory statements include false claims of authorized operation in the name of MyGOP, claims of criminal felony convictions, claims of fraudulent and/or misleading activities. Michigan's primary election day is on February 27th, and Thursday was the first day that, according to state law, absentee voter ballots and secure drop boxes have to be available. So county and city clerks across the state are getting ready to start collecting ballots. In Lansing, for example, City Clerk Chris Swope opened a new elections office there. His office also sent out about 7,000 ballots that day. He says his new office is an example of a local government responding to the needs of voters.
It's a lot of customer-facing things, voter-facing, public-facing entities that are here. So we're hoping that this will be a synergistic hub of activity, and we're glad to be a part of it.
Early in-person voting begins on February 17th across the state. Well, coming up next year on the Capitol Rundown, our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic will be here to give us the inside story on Michigan politics. But first, we're going to hear what Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Republicans in the state legislature are saying about proposed tax cuts. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Republicans in the state legislature are putting pressure on the governor's office to pass more tax cuts. But as our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic reports, Governor Gretchen Whitmer is resisting those calls.
It's an age-old philosophical and political difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. Republicans love to cut taxes to help citizens, while the Democrats love to spend more of that money to help those citizens. And as the 2024 legislative session begins to unfold under the dome, the two sides are back at it on which is the best way to go. Last Friday, the state's major bean counters forecast additional revenue for the state, minus those federal COVID dollars that created a massive surplus in Michigan government for 2 years. Not anymore.
There's a lot less revenue for us to figure out how to solve some of these challenges.
But the ranking Republican on the House Budget Committee, Representative Sarah Lightner, she argues there is enough new revenue to give some of it back to you. The governor, however, in a preemptive strike, is ruling it out, saying, quote, "I don't see any big sweeping changes on that front," end quote. So much for that. Meanwhile, the House Republican leader, Matt Hall, has been blasting the Democrats for already raising your taxes in this new year, as a temporary income tax cut last year expired because the Democrats did not extend it. And he predicts the governor will raise taxes again based on some of the recommendations her Population Growth Commission has endorsed. This Lansing chair of the Senate Budget Committee reports that everything is on the table at this early stage, but she has not endorsed a tax hike at this read. You're going to have to cut some of the budget?
You know, everything's a part of the negotiation. If something's not working on behalf of the people, of course, we'll reconsider.
Meanwhile, the governor will lay out the groundwork for this traditional inter-party political debate over tax cuts and spending when she releases her new budget next month.
All right, Tim. Well, he recently spoke to the Rundown's Jorma Duran about the fight over taxes. And he also gave us an update on whether or not Governor Whitmer will add author to her resume.
It's time to get updated politically here in the state of Michigan, and nobody better than this guy right here, Tim Skubic, to help us out. Tim, from your report, we know the Republicans are pushing the governor for a tax cut, but it seems she put an end to that. So do Republican lawmakers have any other options open to change her mind?
Good question, Jorma. Nice to be with you. Look, the Republicans do have an option. They'll continue to say, Governor, you ought to do this, and she'll continue to say, no, I won't, and set your watch for 6 months from now, and they'll still be saying the same thing. Here's what's going on. Traditionally, in the legislative process, the Republicans do love to cut taxes and put money back in your pocket. Democrats, for the most part, will do tax cuts, but they like to spend on programs that will also help you. And so neither the twain will meet. There's a huge disagreement. Republicans say, let's do it. We've got enough money. The governor says, there's other stuff I want to do. Thank you very much. The other thing that's on the table potentially are tax increases. For example, as we've reported earlier, there's an effort underway by some people who are anti-tobacco who would like to raise the tobacco tax and expand it to include vaping products. Now, there's a tax increase that would actually save lives. But let's remember that any discussion of taxes, whether it's tax cuts or tax hikes, are coming in the middle of what we call an election year, which changes the political dynamics on this issue tremendously. In order to vote on a tax increase or a tax cut in an election year, you have to do the math. Does this help me get reelected or not? And if the answer is not, it won't get done.
Tim, you told us recently about the possibility of Governor Gretchen Whitmer writing a book. What's the latest update on that?
The governor has already told us that she's going to write a book at some point, but the New York Post reported this week that she had already inked a deal with Simon Schuster in 7 figures. The governor said quickly, quote, not accurate. Now, we talked to her over the holidays. She said she would probably write 2 books. One right now, basically about her philosophy of politics, and then after she's out of office, about her life and the trials and tribulations of being Governor Gretchen Whitmer. All of this stuff is in the works. She basically says, stay tuned. When she's got something to announce, she will. And when she writes the book, we'll read it.
Well, we appreciate all the information, Tim. Good to see you.
All right, Tim Jorma, thank you. Coming up, the race to replace Senator Debbie Stabenow in Washington was already crowded. Well, make room for some more candidates. We'll have the details on who's thinking about running and who just announced they are running. That and much more coming up next. Welcome back. Ever since Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow announced last year that she will not be running for re-election, there's been no shortage of Republicans and Democrats hoping to take her place on Capitol Hill. And now businessman and Republican Glenn Wilson says he is running. According to his campaign website, Wilson supports a number of far-right policy positions. Those include opposing what he says are woke policies. He names, quote, biological men participating in women's sports, end quote, as one of those. He is also backing Donald Trump to return to the White House, and Wilson had a section of True the Vote on his campaign website as of Thursday. It was a map of Michigan with alleged names and locations of voters in Michigan who, according to the map legend, are fraudulently registered to vote. Well, by Friday, that section no longer appeared on his website. Wilson's other positions are more traditional, decrying the state of food, housing, and healthcare costs under the Biden administration. A name possibly more familiar to Michigan voters is Justin Amash. On Thursday, the former U.S. Congressman from Grand Rapids launched an exploratory committee for a possible U.S. Senate bid. Amash made the announcement on social media saying the Senate needs a consistent, constitutional conservative. In 2019, he left the Republican Party over ideological differences. He was representing the state's 3rd district at the time and had been in Congress for 5 terms. The staunch libertarian joined Democrats in calling for an impeachment inquiry into former President Donald Trump. In return, Mr. Trump called Amash dumb and a loser. While Amash left Congress as an independent, he has not said if he'll stay an independent for a Senate run if he runs. Speaking of Donald Trump, 2 Michigan politicians are asking for the United States Supreme Court to quickly make a ruling on whether the former president can appear on election ballots. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson formally petitioned the High Court to make a clear and quick decision on whether Mr. Trump is eligible under the 14th Amendment. That amendment bars people who participated in an insurrection against the United States from holding office. Benson previously said it would be an issue best left to Congress to rule on. But now that Colorado's Supreme Court ruled to keep Mr. Trump off their ballot, the issue has gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. On social media Thursday, Republican Senate candidate from Michigan, Peter Meijer, said he filed an amicus brief with the court, and he says Colorado's ruling is wrong and that the former president should not be kept off of ballots through an act of the courts. Meijer is a former U.S. congressman who was voted out of office after supporting the impeachment of Mr. Trump. As a current Senate candidate, Meijer says he will support Mr. Trump if the former president wins the primary. Well, coming up next here on the rundown, before the weekend's winter storm hit Washington, D.C., lawmakers were able to avert a government shutdown. We'll have the details on the budget agreement. But first, the Iowa caucus was on Monday, and Republican presidential primary landscape, it has shifted quite a bit. We'll tell you how when the rundown returns. Former President Donald Trump has won the first in the nation Iowa caucuses, closing out the official first chapter of the 2024 campaign as Iowans braved frigid temperatures to cast their votes. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley was in Des Moines with the story.
Iowa, we love you.
On Monday night, former President Donald Trump did what he came to do in Iowa, leave the state a winner.
This is the first, because the big night is going to be in November.
Despite facing more than 90 criminal charges across multiple states, Iowa Republicans showed they want the former president to be their next one.
Because of your support, in spite of all of that they threw at us, everyone against us, we've got our ticket punched out of Iowa.
Governor Ron DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley took second and third places respectively, leaving their paths forward in question.
I love you, Iowa, but we're on to New Hampshire.
Tech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy suspending his campaign after a fourth-place finish, throwing his support behind Trump.
He will have my full endorsement for the presidency, and I think we're going to do the right thing for this country.
So it's now off to New Hampshire, a great place. We won it last time.
Meanwhile, the House and Senate have both approved a short-term spending bill to avoid a partial government shutdown ahead of a winter storm hitting the nation's capital. Our Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson has those details.
Congress may have avoided a government shutdown for now, but the big fight is up next, and that's coming up with an agreement for a longer-term spending plan.
No chaos, no spectacle, no shutdown.
Congress is moving forward to keep the government open until early March.
Getting here wasn't easy.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says failing to fund the government would have hurt veterans, farmers, and middle-class families. And West Virginia Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito agrees.
It's a road to nowhere, nobody benefits.
But Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul slammed his colleagues for passing a stopgap bill instead of a long-term federal spending plan.
Today we are gathered once again to kick the can down the road.
Even with this agreement to keep the government open for now, lawmakers and President Biden are battling over a separate national security package that would include funding for Ukraine, Israel, and the southern border.
I think the vast majority of members of Congress support aid for Ukraine.
After a meeting with congressional leaders at the White House, the president said he is optimistic a deal will be reached soon.
I thought the meeting went well yesterday.
And when it comes to that bill to keep the government open, President Biden is expected to sign it soon. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson, back to you.
Well, coming up next, NASA has long been planning to return astronauts to the surface of the moon, but the path to space has hit some roadblocks. We'll tell you what they're saying in the halls of Congress about when the rockets will launch again. Stay with us. Welcome back. Astronauts will now have to wait until next year before flying to the moon and at least 2 years before landing on it. Congress, who approves the money for these missions, wants to know more about what caused the delays and their potential impacts. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenor reports.
These 4 astronauts are ready to fly to the moon, but NASA says the equipment to get them there is not. So they'll have to wait.
Have adjusted the Artemis II schedule based on crew safety.
Catherine Kerner with NASA told a House committee Wednesday there are problems with the spacecraft's heat shield and life support system.
We want to fully understand that before we put Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy on Artemis II.
NASA planned to send the crew to orbit the moon later this year. That will now have to wait until the fall of next year. And NASA said Artemis III, the first human moon landing in more than 50 years, is also delayed to September 2026. But former NASA administrator Dr. Michael Griffin said don't count on it.
I don't think the Artemis III, the landing mission, is at all realistically scheduled.
California Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren noted NASA relies heavily on private companies for the rocket, moonwalking suits, and other equipment.
If one of these elements is delayed, what happens to the whole program?
NASA said all of its industry partners have signed on to the new launch date, but lawmakers worry the U.S. may be losing the space race. Florida Congressman Bill Posey said it's a matter of national security.
Whoever controls space will control the destiny of this Earth.
Posey said the U.S. is running out of time. China is aiming to put astronauts on the moon by 2030. In Washington, I'm Jessie Tenor.
If you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we've got just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera right there at the screen right now. This will take you to the sign up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletter. And that's our show for this week. Thank you so much for watching the Capitol Rundown. We'll see you all again right here next week.